So this is our Bill Steinbicker interview, take one.
I started doing photography when I was about 10 years old. I was rummaging around the attic and I found an old box camera and I was intrigued by it. So I ran downstairs and went to my mom and said, "Will you get me a roll of film?" And she did. And that's when I started taking pictures. When I was in high school, photography had become more important to me. I joined the high school camera club. We took pictures, we went on field trips, set up a small darkroom in my basement. I was fascinated by photography and just continued on with that. Right after I graduated from high school, I loved photography so much, I was ready to just open a shop and become a photographer. Fortunately, I had a mentor who convinced me that I could still do photography, but having a college background made the whole career much more fulfilling. I finished college, my deferment was over. I would have been drafted into the Army. Then I discovered that if I joined the Air Force and put in 4 years rather than a smaller number in the Army, they promised to let me do film work. I really wanted to do that. I mean, that had been a lot of my career. So I enlisted, and like everybody else, you got to go through good old basic training. So they got me onto a train heading down to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. There we did all the usual basic training stuff, calisthenics and marching and getting yelled out by the drill instructors. My name is Bill Steinbicker, Airman First Class. I became an Air Force motion picture cameraman, stationed in Edwards Air Force Base in California, then in Yokota Air Base in Japan, and then Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii. We did film work all over the place, around the Pacific area, Japan and Okinawa and Guam. And then they moved me back to Hawaii for some special projects. The special projects were spy photography. Back in those days, the U-2 airplane that flew about 90,000 feet was going over the Soviet Union and places like that, photographing different things that they were doing for reconnaissance and informational purposes. And the Air Force knew that sooner or later, the Soviets would have some kind of a missile that would shoot down a high-flying plane like the U-2. So they were preparing for it. And they were developing a spy satellite. This was classified, but it is no more. It was the Project Corona, and it was a Corona satellite that would circle the Earth. It would be taking pictures, and then the satellite would eject a capsule that had some of that film with the spy pictures on it. But even then, none of us knew the purpose of this satellite that was up in the air dropping these capsules. The capsule would come down to Earth. This part of it now is Project Discoverer. What we would do is fly out over the Pacific and snatch these capsules out of the air and pull them into the plane. While we were doing this, what they needed photographers like me for was to document the pickup. If something went wrong, the film I was taking, they could look at that and analyze what happened and fix it for the next time. But we also had another role, and that is to kind of take publicity pictures. I or any of the other cameramen on the different planes could shoot out the windows if we were right next to the plane that was actually picking up. And so one of my pictures that I got actually appeared on the front page of the Honolulu Star Bulletin to tell people what was going on, what's all this special stuff out at Hickam Air Force Base. When we were working in the plane, we all wore parachutes and we had straps holding us in when we're filming out, because the back of the C-119 is wide open. I mean, you could literally just step off the edge and open your parachute. as we went out on these missions, they were going to be 12-hour flights. They had done some special engineering work so that these C-119 flying boxcars could stay in the air that long. We all got briefed, and they told us these planes were taking off 2 tons overweight. They could fly with 2 engines, but if one of the 2 engines went out, they couldn't fly. So they would hold the plane on the runway, and they'd keep gaining speed. And then as they got near the end of the runway, they would lift off with the knowledge that they had enough speed that if something happened to one of the engines, the plane could clear the base service roads and, if necessary, ditch on a sand beach out in the water. Once we were airborne, then we knew it took about 40 minutes or so to get up to cruising altitude. They would use up that extra fuel, and the plane would reach a weight that it could actually continue to fly on one engine. How the plane would work this, it would come down, the pilots were trained to do this. They'd swoop down, catch the falling parachute with the capsule on it. They'd try to capture the shrouds of the parachute in a grappling hook line. They would scoop it out of the air, and then as soon as they had it hooked in, the plane is going 300 miles an hour, and the parachute is falling straight down. So that would be a big jolt if it suddenly grabbed that. They had it set up so that as the parachute caught, it would let a nylon rope unwind that would then go out with the capsule. And that reel had a clutch on it so that it would gradually bring the capsule up to the airplane speed. Then the other crew members would grab it and pull the capsule into the plane, and then the mission was successful. We did learn much later that the images that this satellite captured were very useful because they were replacing what the U-2 planes had been doing but could no longer do. Intelligence people could pore over those pictures and see if they could see anything of any value. Now, this was a pretty successful adventure. Snatching capsules with film out of the sky over the Pacific Ocean is kind of a different sort of thing. Project Discover was featured in the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. I went to see that. They had great pictures of the pickups and the planes and some of the crew members. I really enjoyed a lot of freedom to do things and got involved with all kinds of fantastic programs and met one of my best friends, a guy named Airman First Class Ken Hackman, who was the marvelous still photographer at our air base in Japan. And to this day, I still know Ken. He's my best friend and my only surviving Air Force buddy. I decided I was done with the Air Force. I did not go into the Air Force Reserves. I had a great time, but now it was time to become a civilian again. I came to work for a film producer in Richfield, Minnesota. This film producer did a lot of film work for the U.S. government and for Honeywell. Being accustomed to airborne photography, I would do films from helicopters using gyro-stabilized cameras so they didn't bounce around with the helicopter. And I would sit with my feet out on the landing skid, and the camera was supported by this sort of gyro-controlled device, and I would film out there. Have perfect view, nothing was in my way, and I got great pictures. We'd fly mostly in the Minneapolis area to film Honeywell capabilities. And we would film aerials, just me and the pilot and the camera. For the FAA, it was called Airports in Perspective. And the idea of that film was to show people that airports and housing and cities can live harmoniously together as long as they are planned properly. We flew all over the country filming different airports and the communities that surrounded them. The humorous part of that was we were filming out at Logan Airport in Boston. And we were using a U.S. government Coast Guard amphibious helicopter because we didn't have to pay to use that. And I reached a point, the magazine was empty on my camera, and so I asked the pilot over the intercom, just hang on a bit, I've got to change film. So while I'm changing film, I'm feeling something strange happening, and all of a sudden I realized we had just landed in the middle of the Charles River so that the pilot could relax a little while I'm getting the film magazine changed. And as we were there, I noticed all these cars stopping on the side of the river looking at us. I'll say that was the first amphibious landing I've made in an aircraft.